Maya was a young woman with a determined spirit. She worked long hours as a food delivery rider, moving quickly through the busy city streets on her small bicycle. Every morning, she packed her delivery bag with care and double-checked her phone for orders. Life was not always easy for her. She had to balance her college classes with her delivery shifts, but she never complained. She saw the job not just as a way to make money, but as a step toward building her independence. She carried herself with quiet confidence, even when others underestimated her. On this particular afternoon, the sun was bright, and the streets were crowded with cars, buses, and people rushing about. Maya's phone buzzed, signaling her last order of the day. She smiled, knowing that after this, she would finally get to rest and review for her exams. She adjusted her helmet, tightened the strap of her delivery bag, and started pedaling toward the restaurant. The scent of fresh food filled the air as she entered, picked up the order, and placed it gently in her bag. The neighborhood she was delivering to was about 15 minutes away. It was an area known for its mix of office buildings and small shops. The sidewalks were full of people, and the road was filled with impatient drivers honking their horns. But Maya was used to this chaos. She knew which alleys were shortcuts, which traffic lights took longer, and how to weave her way safely through the city. With every turn of her pedals, she felt herself getting closer to the end of her long day. As she waited at a red light, she noticed a group of motorbikes roaring up behind her. Their engines were loud, almost drowning out the sounds of people talking and car horns blaring. At the front of the group was Rick, a biker known in that area for his flashy rides and loud attitude. Rick loved attention. He had polished leather boots, a jacket with patches, and a shiny helmet that reflected the sunlight. People often turned their heads when he passed, partly impressed and partly annoyed by his noise. Maya kept her focus ahead, balancing her bicycle carefully while waiting for the light to turn green. She didn't pay much attention to the bikers because, to her, they were just part of the background of the city. But Rick noticed her. He saw the delivery bag strapped to her back, the modest bicycle she was riding, and the calm way she ignored the roar of his engine. Something about her composure bothered him, though Maya hadn't done anything wrong. The light was still red, and the street was filled with cars waiting on both sides. Pedestrians stood at the crosswalk, waiting to cross once the signal changed. Maya adjusted her grip on the handlebars, humming softly to herself. She thought of how happy the customer would be to get their meal warm and on time. She thought of how good it would feel to finally sit down at home, drink water, and stretch her tired legs. But then, something unexpected happened. As Rick revved his engine loudly beside her, Maya's bicycle slightly shifted closer to his motorbike. It wasn't much, just a small brush of her elbow against the handlebar of his shiny bike. To anyone else, it would have been nothing at all. In a busy street full of vehicles, such tiny contact was almost unavoidable. Maya quickly steadied herself and whispered, "Sorry," under her breath, though she knew it was barely noticeable. Rick, however, did not see it that way. He frowned under his helmet, feeling as though his pride had been touched. For someone like him, image was everything. He enjoyed being admired, feared, and respected on the streets. To have a simple delivery girl brush against his bike, even by accident, felt like an insult to him. He leaned a little closer and glared at Maya, though she kept her eyes forward, still humming and waiting for the light. The people around were unaware of the tension beginning to rise. Cars behind them honked impatiently, the drivers eager to move forward once the light turned green. Street vendors called out to sell cold drinks and snacks. Children tugged at their parents' hands, pointing at the row of colorful motorbikes. To everyone else, it was just another ordinary moment in the busy city. But for Rick, the situation had already become personal. Maya's delivery bag shifted slightly as she adjusted it on her shoulders. She glanced at her phone to make sure the order was still safe and that she was on the right route. She did not notice the way Rick's eyes followed her every move. He tapped his gloved fingers against the handlebar, the sound mixing with the soft roar of his engine. For reasons even he might not have fully understood, he felt the urge to assert himself, to remind the delivery girl of her place. The light flickered from red to green, and the street came alive with motion. Cars accelerated, bikes surged forward, and pedestrians crossed quickly. Maya pedaled carefully, slipping into the flow of traffic. She thought the moment had passed. To her, it was just another ride, another delivery. But Rick followed close, his bike roaring louder than necessary, staying just a little too near to her bicycle. Maya kept her focus, steady and calm, unaware that this small encounter was about to turn into something that would change the way people on that street remembered the day. For her, it was simply about delivering food and getting home. For Rick, however, it had already become a test of his pride. The road stretched ahead, crowded yet familiar. Maya's mind wandered briefly to her mother waiting at home, the dinner she would prepare, and the laughter they would share later in the evening. She thought of her dreams of finishing her studies and moving toward a brighter future. Little did she know, the events of the next few minutes would not only challenge her strength but also prove something about her courage to everyone watching. The traffic moved steadily, and Maya kept pedaling at her own pace. She always preferred to stay careful, not rushing too much even if cars and motorbikes zoomed past her. She knew that safety mattered more than speed. The delivery bag on her back bounced lightly as she rode, and she checked the street signs to make sure she was heading in the right direction. For her, it was just another day of work. But Rick had a different mood. His bike roared louder than necessary, and the way he weaved through cars showed that he wanted attention. The people around could hear him coming from far away, and some even shook their heads at his behavior. He enjoyed being noticed, but he also carried with him a short temper. To him, respect wasn't earned through kindness but through fear. As they both reached the next stoplight, fate seemed to place them side by side again. Maya balanced her bicycle quietly, taking a sip of water from the small bottle she carried. She thought of how close she was to finishing her shift, and she felt a sense of relief. But Rick, still thinking of the small brush from earlier, couldn't let go of his irritation. He leaned slightly toward her and muttered a sharp remark. Maya didn't hear him at first because of the noise from the engines and horns around. She stayed calm, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. When she didn't react, Rick raised his voice, making sure his words carried over the sound of traffic. He mocked her job, questioning why she was riding on the same road as big motorbikes like his. This time, Maya caught the words. She blinked, a little surprised, but didn't respond. She had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the best answer. Her parents had taught her to focus on her goals and not waste energy on people who only wanted to drag her down. But her silence seemed to annoy Rick even more. He wanted a reaction. Suddenly, with a careless swing of his arm, he knocked against her delivery bag. The bag tilted, and one of the food containers slipped out, tumbling onto the road. Maya quickly stopped her bicycle and jumped off, trying to save the rest of the order from falling. Her heart raced as she bent down to check. Thankfully, only one item had spilled, and the rest was still safe. The people nearby noticed. A couple walking on the sidewalk paused, watching curiously. A man waiting for a bus frowned, shaking his head at the biker's action. Maya could feel their eyes on her, but she focused on carefully securing her bag again. Rick laughed loudly, as if what he had done was nothing more than a joke. The sound of his laughter carried down the street, mixing with the rumble of engines. To him, it was entertainment. To Maya, it was humiliation. She felt her cheeks warm, not because she was angry, but because she hated being the center of unwanted attention. She stood up straight, adjusted her bag, and looked at Rick calmly. "That wasn't necessary," she said softly, her voice steady. Her calmness took him by surprise for a moment. Most people either shouted back at him or ignored him completely. Maya's tone wasn't angry, but it carried a quiet strength that made him pause. But then, unwilling to back down in front of onlookers, he smirked and revved his engine again. "Maybe next time you'll watch where you're going," he said, raising his voice so that others could hear. The light turned green, and traffic moved once more. Maya climbed back onto her bicycle, determined to finish her delivery. She refused to let one person ruin her entire day. Still, inside her, a mix of emotions swirled. She felt upset at the disrespect but also proud that she hadn't lost her temper. She reminded herself that her dignity was worth more than arguing with someone like him. As they moved forward, Rick stayed close behind her, his engine growling. It was as though he wanted to intimidate her further. Each time she looked straight ahead, refusing to turn toward him, it seemed to irritate him more. He couldn't understand how someone so small and ordinary-looking could remain so unshaken by his attempts. The street grew busier as they approached the central market area. Vendors called out their prices, and the smell of roasted corn and fried snacks filled the air. Children laughed as they played near the sidewalks, and families hurried to buy groceries before heading home. Maya pedaled carefully through it all, her eyes sharp, making sure not to bump into anyone. Rick followed closely, still looking for a chance to prove his dominance. He waited until they slowed near another stoplight, and then, without warning, he nudged his bike forward, making the loud exhaust roar right beside her ear. The sudden noise startled her, but she gripped her handlebars firmly and didn't flinch. This reaction, or rather the lack of reaction, caught the attention of people nearby. A few raised their eyebrows at the biker's unnecessary behavior. One older man muttered something under his breath about how some riders didn't know how to respect others on the road. Maya felt their eyes again, but this time she also felt a quiet sense of strength. She realized that she wasn't just standing up for herself, she was showing others that calmness could be more powerful than noise. Even though Rick tried to embarrass her, she managed to hold her ground. The delivery time was ticking, and she knew she had to move faster. She weaved through the traffic, her small bicycle moving smoothly between cars. Her focus sharpened, and she reminded herself of the customer waiting for their meal. That customer didn't know what she was going through on the road, they only expected a warm meal at their door. That thought gave her fresh determination. Rick, however, didn't let go. His pride wouldn't allow him to be ignored. Each time Maya gained a little distance, he revved his bike harder, catching up to her again. The sound was loud, the attention unnecessary, but Maya's steady rhythm on the pedals showed that she wasn't going to be shaken easily. By the time they reached another busy square, more people had begun noticing the strange chase between a humble delivery rider and a showy biker. Some whispered, pointing discreetly, while others shook their heads at the unnecessary scene. Maya, though tired and embarrassed, held her chin high. She knew she couldn't control Rick's behavior, but she could control her own response. And she decided that no matter what, she wouldn't let him destroy her peace of mind. The respect she carried for herself became her quiet shield. And though the biker thought he had made her small, he hadn't realized that his actions were slowly drawing the crowd's sympathy toward her instead of him. The stage was unknowingly being set for what was to come next, a moment that would flip everything upside down and leave Rick facing the kind of humility he had never imagined. The sun was slowly dipping lower, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. The city's noise seemed louder than ever, horns blaring, vendors calling out, children laughing on sidewalks. Maya pedaled with steady determination, her mind focused on the delivery she still had to complete. She wanted to put the unpleasant encounter behind her, finish her work, and go home. But Rick wasn't finished. For him, the day had turned into a matter of pride. Each time Maya ignored his mocking behavior, it only fueled his need to prove himself. He wasn't used to being overlooked. On most days, people reacted with fear or irritation whenever he revved his bike at them. But Maya's calm, composed manner felt like a challenge to him. And he wanted to win. As they entered a slightly less crowded stretch of road, Rick decided this was the moment to make himself look powerful. He twisted the throttle sharply, making the motorbike roar as he swerved dangerously close to Maya's bicycle. The loud noise startled some pedestrians, and a few even shouted in anger at his reckless driving. Maya gripped her handlebars tightly, her heart racing for a moment. But she steadied herself quickly, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Rick smirked under his helmet. "Let's see if you're still so calm now," he muttered to himself. He revved again, this time leaning the bike toward her as though he was about to knock her off the road. It was a childish act meant only to scare her. Maya, however, had learned to stay alert. Her brother, who practiced martial arts, often showed her basic self-defense moves and how to maintain balance in difficult situations. She remembered his words clearly: sometimes strength isn't about hitting back, it's about using the other person's weight against them. Those lessons echoed in her mind as Rick tried to overwhelm her with noise and speed. A few people on the sidewalk began to notice what was happening. Some shook their heads in disapproval, while others slowed down to see how the situation would unfold. Maya could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't let fear take over. She reminded herself that staying calm was her greatest strength. Suddenly, Rick leaned too close. His bike's handle grazed her arm, and for a brief second, Maya thought he might actually push her off balance. But instead of panicking, she acted with quick instinct. She swerved slightly to the side, letting his bike tilt forward more than he expected. His sudden overreach made him wobble. The heavy machine began to shake beneath him, and though Rick tried to correct it, the angle was wrong. In that split second, Maya used her presence of mind. She pushed back lightly, not with anger, but with precise timing. The momentum of his own movement worked against him. The large bike tilted sharply, and before he knew it, Rick lost control. With a loud thud, the motorbike crashed onto its side, pinning him underneath. The engine sputtered, the tires spun for a moment, and then the machine settled heavily across his leg. Rick groaned in shock, caught under the very weight of the bike he had been so proud to display. Gasps filled the air. People on the street stopped what they were doing and rushed closer to see what had happened. A man who had been selling fruit dropped his basket and hurried over, while others stood with wide eyes, murmuring about the sudden fall. Maya slowed her bicycle, her breathing steady but her mind racing. She turned back to look, and there he was, Rick, trapped under his own motorbike, struggling to move. For a moment, the sight felt unreal. Just minutes ago, he had been the one laughing, mocking, and roaring his engine to scare her. Now, he was the one who needed help. Rick tried to lift the bike, but the weight was too much for him while lying on the ground. He grunted in frustration, his pride wounded more than his body. The crowd around him whispered, some pointing at Maya with admiration. They had seen everything. They knew she hadn't attacked him, he had brought this upon himself. Maya walked her bicycle closer, standing a short distance away. She didn't smirk, she didn't laugh, she simply stood with calm dignity. Her silence spoke louder than words. It showed that she hadn't needed to fight or shout. All she had done was stand her ground, and Rick's arrogance had undone him. "Are you all right?" one of the bystanders finally asked Rick, though the tone carried more judgment than concern. Rick didn't answer. His face burned with embarrassment. He tugged at the handlebars, trying again to lift the bike, but his struggle only made the situation look worse. A few men from the crowd stepped forward, ready to help him, but not before casting respectful glances toward Maya. For the first time since the encounter began, Rick's image of power had crumbled. He had wanted to embarrass Maya in front of everyone, but instead, he was the one humiliated. His own actions had led to his downfall, literally. Maya looked at him one last time, her expression calm but firm. She didn't need to say much. Her presence alone reminded everyone that respect should never be taken lightly. She adjusted her delivery bag, climbed back onto her bicycle, and began to pedal away. The crowd slowly dispersed, some helping Rick lift the bike off himself. A few shook their heads, whispering about how arrogance often leads to trouble. Others quietly praised Maya's courage and composure. They admired how she hadn't lost her dignity, even when pushed to her limits. As Maya rode away, her thoughts were mixed. She wasn't proud of what had happened, nor did she celebrate it. To her, it was simply proof that standing firm with calmness was stronger than reacting with anger. She didn't feel the need to shout or argue. Her actions had spoken louder than any words could. Rick, meanwhile, sat on the ground for a long moment, breathing heavily. His pride was bruised, his reputation shaken, and his mind restless. He had never expected to be the one left helpless, especially by someone he thought was weaker. As the people's whispers followed him, he realized that this moment would not be forgotten easily. And just like that, the balance of power had shifted. The girl he had tried to humiliate was the one who walked away with her head held high, while he remained in the dust, trapped by his own mistakes. The street was buzzing with voices after the crash. The sound of the motorbike hitting the ground had drawn everyone's attention, and for a few seconds, it seemed as if the whole area had paused. Vendors stopped calling out their prices, customers froze with shopping bags in their hands, and pedestrians halted mid-step. All eyes turned to the side of Rick, the once boastful biker, now struggling beneath the weight of his own machine. Rick tried to push the bike off himself, but his pride made him refuse help at first. He gritted his teeth, pressing hard on the handlebars, but the motorcycle was heavy and awkward. The more he struggled, the clearer it became to everyone that he wasn't going to free himself easily. His leather jacket and helmet, which once made him look so powerful, now only made him appear clumsy. Maya stood nearby for a brief moment. She looked at him calmly, her bicycle steady at her side. There was no sign of anger on her face, no satisfaction in his misfortune. She didn't need to say anything, the scene spoke for itself. With quiet grace, she turned her bicycle forward and began to ride away, her back straight and her movements calm. The crowd, however, stayed. Several people stepped closer to Rick. A fruit seller and a young man who had been waiting for the bus bent down to help him lift the bike. Together, they managed to push the heavy machine upright, freeing Rick from underneath. He winced as he pulled himself up, brushing the dust off his jacket and trying to stand tall again. But no matter how much he straightened his shoulders, the look in people's eyes had changed. They no longer looked at him with fear or admiration. Instead, their faces carried judgment, disappointment, and even amusement. "Serves him right," someone whispered from the side. "That poor girl was just doing her job," another person muttered. Rick could hear their words, and each one stung more than the scrape on his arm or the bruise forming on his leg. His pride, the very thing he had built his image on, had been broken in front of strangers. Meanwhile, Maya continued on her way, her mind steady. She reminded herself not to let anger linger. She had a delivery to complete, and that mattered more than anything else at the moment. She thought of the customer waiting for their meal and of her own family waiting for her at home. She knew that dignity wasn't about shouting or fighting, it was about moving forward with calm strength. As she pedaled through the streets, people who had witnessed the event carried the story with them. Some shared it with shopkeepers, others told their friends, and soon whispers spread across the area. By the time evening arrived, many knew of the young delivery girl who had stood her ground against the arrogant biker. Back at the square, Rick sat on a bench for a while, his helmet resting on his knee. He kept replaying the scene in his head. He had wanted to show power, but instead he had shown weakness. His actions had backfired completely. He could still see the calm expression on Maya's face, the way she had refused to lower herself to his level. It made him uncomfortable, but it also planted a thought he couldn't shake: Perhaps real strength wasn't about noise and intimidation after all. A few of his biker friends arrived later, curious about the incident. When they saw him bruised and his bike scratched, they tried to laugh it off, but even their laughter couldn't cover the truth. They knew the story too. And though they tried to comfort him, some of them secretly admired the girl who had turned the tables without even raising her voice. For Rick, the humiliation lingered. Each time someone in the crowd glanced his way, he felt the sting of their judgment. He realized that respect couldn't be demanded through fear. Fear faded quickly, but dignity left a lasting impression. Maya, on the other hand, reached her customer's home and handed over the delivery with her usual polite smile. The customer had no idea what she had just gone through on the road. To them, she was simply a hard-working delivery girl who had arrived on time. Maya accepted the payment, thanked them, and rode off with a sigh of relief. On her way home, she thought about what had happened. She wasn't happy about the disrespect she had faced, but she was proud of how she had handled it. She hadn't lost her temper, she hadn't let herself be dragged into anger, she had simply stood her ground. That, to her, was victory enough. Later that evening, as she sat with her mother at the dinner table, she chose not to tell the full story. She only mentioned that the roads had been a little more chaotic than usual. Her mother smiled warmly, reminding her to always take care of herself and to stay safe. Maya nodded, holding the moment close to her heart. She knew she had proven something important, not just to Rick but also to herself. In the days that followed, the story of the incident continued to spread in the neighborhood. People talked about the biker who had been left helpless under his own motorcycle, and they praised the delivery girl who had shown such quiet courage. Some even recognized Maya on the streets and gave her encouraging smiles. Rick, however, found himself facing the consequences of his actions. Whenever he rode his bike through the same streets, he noticed the way people looked at him differently. The fear was gone, replaced by whispers and amused glances. He had become the subject of a story that humbled him in ways he had never expected. For the first time in years, Rick felt small. And in that smallness, he began to reflect. He realized that respect could never be forced. It had to be earned through kindness, humility, and fairness. His encounter with Maya had shown him that arrogance only led to downfall. The lesson was not easy for him to accept, but it stayed with him. And though his pride still ached, deep down, he knew he would never forget the girl who had taught him that true strength was not in noise, but in dignity. In the days that followed the incident, the memory of what had happened on the busy street did not fade quickly. People continued to talk about it in small shops, in the market, and even at bus stops. The story had become something larger than just a single clash between a biker and a delivery girl. It had turned into a lesson that many people carried with them. Maya went about her routine quietly. She continued her deliveries, attending her college classes, and helping her mother at home. She did not brag about what had happened, nor did she let it fill her with pride. To her, it had simply been a test of character, a moment where she chose calmness over anger and courage over fear. Her life, in many ways, remained the same. She still woke early, strapped her delivery bag to her shoulders, and pedaled through the noisy city streets. But the way people looked at her had changed. Some shopkeepers who had seen the incident greeted her with extra warmth. One older woman at the bakery told her, "Child, you remind us that respect is stronger than noise." A group of young school children once waved at her as she passed, whispering among themselves, "That's the girl who stood up to the biker." Maya smiled politely at their admiration, though she never let it distract her from her work. Rick, on the other hand, felt the weight of humiliation every time he walked out with his motorcycle. The roar of his engine, which once drew attention and admiration, now drew whispers. His biker friends, though loyal, teased him gently when the story came up. And in the eyes of strangers, he saw less respect and more judgment. At first, Rick was angry. He blamed Maya for making him look weak. He blamed the crowd for not respecting him the way they used to. But as days turned into weeks, that anger softened into something else, reflection. He replayed the moment in his head over and over, the way she had stood calm while he tried to scare her, the way he had lost control of his bike, and the way she had walked away without saying a word. That silence, that dignity, stayed with him more than anything else. One evening, Rick sat by himself at a small roadside tea stall. He watched people walking by, carrying bags of groceries, calling out to friends, or hurrying home after work. For the first time, he wondered how many of them might have whispered about him. He sipped his tea slowly, realizing that fear could never bring him the kind of respect he had once thought it could. Respect, he understood now, was something earned through humility, not demanded through noise. Meanwhile, Maya found herself becoming stronger in quiet ways. Each time she faced a difficult customer, a rude driver, or a long exhausting day, she remembered that moment with Rick. She remembered how calm she had stayed, how her dignity had carried her through, and it gave her strength. She realized that her job, though simple in the eyes of many, gave her opportunities to practice patience, courage, and self-respect. And those qualities would help her far beyond her deliveries. The story spread further when someone who had witnessed the incident shared it online. A passerby had taken a short video of Rick struggling with his bike while Maya calmly pedaled away. The clip was only a few seconds long, but it captured the essence of the moment. Soon, it was being shared across social media. People commented on Maya's courage, her calmness, and the lesson in humility it represented. Maya was surprised when she first heard about the video. She had not wanted attention, and she didn't like being in the spotlight. But when her classmates at college spoke to her about it, she realized that her story was inspiring others. One of her professors even mentioned her in class, saying, "Dignity in the face of disrespect is the mark of true strength." Rick saw the video too. At first, it made his stomach twist with shame. But then, as he read some of the comments, he began to see things differently. People were not mocking him as much as they were admiring Maya. The focus wasn't on his mistake, it was on her strength. And slowly, that realization began to soften his pride. Weeks later, Rick made a decision that surprised even himself. He rode his motorcycle to one of the cafes in the area where Maya often picked up deliveries. When he saw her waiting for an order, he approached her quietly. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure if she would even want to hear him. But then, gathering his courage, he said, "I owe you an apology." Maya looked up, a little surprised. She studied his face, noticing that the arrogance she had once seen was no longer there. His voice carried sincerity, and his shoulders seemed lighter, as though he had been carrying a heavy burden and was finally ready to let it go. "I was wrong," Rick continued. "That day, I disrespected you when you didn't deserve it. I thought showing off would make me look strong, but it only made me weak. You showed me what real strength looks like. Thank you, for teaching me a lesson I needed to learn." Maya listened quietly. She didn't smile right away, but she nodded slowly. "Respect is free," she said softly. "It costs nothing to give, but it means everything to receive." Rick lowered his head, grateful for her words. For the first time in years, he felt genuine respect for someone else, not fear, not admiration for power, but true respect for dignity. From that day on, Rick began to change. His friends noticed he no longer rode his bike recklessly through the streets. He spoke less loudly, carried himself with more humility, and even helped younger riders learn how to handle their bikes safely. Slowly, the whispers around him changed too. People began to notice the difference. They still remembered the story of his humiliation, but now they also noticed his growth. For Maya, life went on with the same rhythm. She continued her deliveries, her studies, and her quiet evenings at home. But she carried with her the knowledge that one simple act of courage could ripple outward and inspire change in others. She hadn't set out to teach anyone a lesson, but her dignity had spoken louder than any words. In the end, both Maya and Rick were changed by that one afternoon. Maya gained confidence in her quiet strength, while Rick learned that humility was more powerful than pride. The busy city streets continued to roar with traffic, vendors, and voices, but in the memory of many, the story of the biker and the delivery girl remained a reminder: respect is stronger than arrogance, dignity is louder than noise, and true strength is shown not in how you treat those above you but in how you treat those you think are below you.